Hey everyone! Today we're talking about the medieval Bulgarian army, a force that once struck fear into the hearts of its enemies and shaped the destiny of Southeast Europe. So sit back and let's explore this incredible story together. Picture this. It's the early days of the Bulgarian state. The army is a fierce mix of Bulgar cavalry and Slavic infantry. At its core is a heavy cavalry force of around 12,000 riders, decked out in full armor, thundering across battlefields. These warriors weren't just soldiers, they were the embodiment of their nation's power. By the 9th and 10th centuries, this army was considered one of the most powerful in Europe. Just the thought of facing them on their home turf was enough to make seasoned Byzantine generals think twice about invading. Now, the army wasn't just about brute strength, it was deeply tied to the survival of the Bulgarian state itself. Under great leaders like Tsar Simeon the Great, the military led Bulgaria into its golden age, carving out a vast empire. But, as with all empires, what goes up must come down. Prolonged wars eventually wore down the Bulgarian forces, and by the 11th century, defeat meant the end of independence, for a time at least. Fast forward to 1185, and Bulgaria rises again. With a series of capable rulers, the army achieves stunning victories against formidable foes like the Byzantines and even Western Crusaders. But as the 13th and 14th centuries roll on, internal fragmentation weakens the state, and the Ottomans begin their unstoppable advance. By 1396, Bulgaria is under Ottoman rule, a fate that wouldn't change until the 19th century. Let's rewind a bit to the roots of this military machine. Back in the 7th and 8th centuries, the early Bulgars were known as fierce warriors, with every adult male expected to fight. They were master horsemen, treating their steeds almost as sacred companions. Their leaders, the khans, commanded not just the army, but the very spirit of their people, organizing their forces into disciplined units that could adapt and outwit enemies with clever strategies. Imagine this: a Bulgarian cavalry unit pretending to retreat, only to turn around and unleash a rain of arrows on their pursuers. Or battles fought under the cover of darkness, with warriors moving like shadows. Even their weapons were advanced for the time: sabers, spears, bows, and shields, along with armor for both men and horses. Discipline was ironclad. Neglecting your weapon or horse wasn't just frowned upon, it could cost you your life. Despite the cavalry being the pride of the army, the Slavic infantry also played a crucial role. They were the foot soldiers, equipped with swords, bows, and shields, though not as heavily armed or disciplined as their mounted counterparts. Together, they formed a balanced force capable of taking on the Byzantines, the Avars, and even the Arabs, as they did during the Second Arab Siege of Constantinople in 718. The 9th century brought a new level of glory under the leadership of Khan Krum. Victories piled up, territories expanded, and Bulgaria became a force to reckon with. By the time Simeon the Great led his army, the sight of tens of thousands of heavily armed Bulgarians marching into battle was enough to strike terror into their enemies. These were warriors with golden and silver shields, ironclad riders who seemed unstoppable. But no empire lasts forever. After decades of intense warfare, exhaustion began to set in. By the reign of Tsar Peter I, the cracks were showing. Internal strife, religious movements like the Bogomil heresy, and external pressures weakened the once mighty army. When the Rus forces invaded in the 10th century, the Bulgarian army was outnumbered and outmaneuvered, leading to devastating losses and the decline of the state. And the fall of the northeastern Bulgarian Empire had left a massive dent in the country's military power. Most of the elite heavy cavalry, which had once been the backbone of their victories, came from that region. With its loss, the Bulgarian army faced a significant transformation, relying more on light cavalry and infantry. This shift in strategy brought about a change in battle tactics too. Ambushes became their signature move, with the rugged terrain of the Balkans giving them a natural advantage. Bulgarian archers earned a reputation for their deadly precision, and their ability to strike from hidden positions kept their enemies on edge. But as the tides of history often go, challenges kept coming. Emperor Samuel, one of the most determined leaders of this era, held the Byzantine forces at bay for nearly 50 years. His resistance was legendary, and in 986, he led the Bulgarians to a stunning victory at the gates of Trajan, where the Byzantine Emperor Basil II barely escaped with his life. For a time, the Bulgarians seemed unstoppable, pushing southward as far as Corinth and taking control of large swaths of territory. But the tides began to turn with a devastating loss at the Battle of Spercheios in 996. This marked the beginning of a long and grueling campaign led by Basil II, who systematically wore down the Bulgarian forces. Over the years, key Bulgarian strongholds fell, and in 1014, the decisive blow came at the Battle of Kleidion. The Bulgarian army, numbering around 20,000, was overwhelmed, and the aftermath was nothing short of tragic. Basil II, known as the Bulgar Slayer, ordered the blinding of 14,000 captured Bulgarian soldiers, a move so horrifying that Samuel reportedly died of shock upon witnessing his army's condition. Though the Bulgarian state fell under Byzantine rule, it wasn't the end of the story. In 1185, the Asin brothers sparked a rebellion that restored the Bulgarian Empire, marking the rise of the Asin dynasty. The army was reborn, borrowing heavily from Byzantine traditions while maintaining its fierce spirit. Under leaders like Kallion and Ivan Asin II, Bulgaria achieved a series of impressive victories. The army now included tens of thousands of men, bolstered by skilled Cuman cavalry from the north. Kallion, famously dubbed Roman Slayer, crushed the Crusaders of the Latin Empire in battles like Adrianople in 1205, capturing Emperor Baldwin I. Ivan Asin II continued this legacy, defeating rivals like the Despotate of Epirus at the Battle of Klokotnitsa in 1230, despite commanding a smaller force. Even the Mongols, feared across Europe and Asia, found themselves challenged by the Bulgarian army under his rule. But after Ivan Asin II's death, internal strife and external invasions took their toll. Civil wars weakened the central authority, and by the time of Ivailo's rebellion in 1277, the once mighty Bulgarian army had dwindled significantly. Ivailo, a commoner who rose to power, managed to defeat both Byzantine and Mongol forces, but political intrigue ultimately led to his demise. The 14th century brought even more challenges. As the Ottoman Turks began their relentless advance, Bulgaria's fragmented forces struggled to mount a unified defense. The lack of coordination and leadership made resistance difficult, and one by one, key Bulgarian strongholds fell. By the late 14th century, the Ottomans had overrun nearly all of Bulgaria, culminating in the fall of Tarnovo in 1393, and Vidin shortly after. The Ottoman conquest was devastating, not just for the Bulgarian army, but for the nation as a whole. The nobility was wiped out or fled, weapons were banned for civilians, and Bulgaria would remain under Ottoman rule for centuries. And now the Bulgarian army wasn't just about sheer force, it was all about clever tactics and adaptability. Their strategies were deeply influenced by the rugged Balkan terrain, which provided natural defenses and made life tough for invading armies. Take Emperor Constantine V, for example. He launched 9 campaigns to crush the early Bulgarian state, but time and again, his forces were trapped and defeated in the mountain passes. The Varbitsa Pass disaster of 811? That was the cherry on top of their defensive mastery, with the Byzantine army completely wiped out. Ambushes and deception played a big role too. One of their favorite moves? The classic fake retreat. Imagine the enemy thinking they've got the upper hand, only to be blindsided when the Bulgarians turned around and launched a devastating counterattack. This trick worked wonders at battles like Adrianople in 1205, where Kallion's forces crushed the Crusaders, leaving them in complete disarray. And let's not forget about their heavy cavalry. They often held back their elite riders until just the right moment, using them to tip the scales when it mattered most, like at Anchialus in 917, where their well-timed cavalry charge ensured a decisive victory. But the Bulgarians weren't all about aggression. Patience was one of their virtues. They'd wait for days, letting their enemies make the first move, then exploit the chaos when the opposing formations inevitably fell apart. It worked brilliantly in battles like Marseille and Versinikia, 813. When the Bulgarians did go on the offensive, they made it count. After a victory, they wouldn't just stop and celebrate. They'd pursue the retreating enemy relentlessly, making sure their foes didn't have a chance to regroup. Following their triumph at Ongol in 680, they chased the Byzantines for over 150 kilometers. It was a strategy that kept the pressure on and left little room for resistance. In terms of mobility, these guys were next level. Their armies could cover insane distances at breakneck speeds. Before the Battle of Klokotnitsa, they managed to travel 3 times farther in just 4 days than their opponents could in a week. In 1332, they marched an impressive 230 kilometers in 5 days. Talk about endurance and efficiency. Siege warfare was another area where the Bulgarians evolved over time. Early on, they were somewhat limited in their siege capabilities, but under Khan Krum, they took a major leap forward. By the early 9th century, they had an arsenal of massive siege machines, battering rams, catapults, siege towers, you name it. These weren't just crude constructions either. They were meticulously built and transported with precision, often in iron-covered carts pulled by thousands of oxen. Capturing Greek fire siphons during the siege of Mesembria only added to their prowess. By the Second Empire, siege warfare became even more sophisticated. During the siege of Adrianople in 1207, Kallian brought 33 catapults and a dedicated engineering corps to dismantle the city's defenses. In another instance, they constructed a massive siege tower for the siege of Varna, wide enough to cross the fortress moat. But the army's strength wasn't just homegrown. Over time, foreign and mercenary soldiers became an essential part of their tactics. The Avars, Pechenegs, Cumans, and even Mongols all played key roles in various campaigns. The Cumans, in particular, were invaluable during the Second Empire. Their swift and agile cavalry often gave the Bulgarians a critical edge, as seen at Adrianople, where 14,000 Cuman riders helped secure victory. Many Cuman leaders even joined the Bulgarian nobility, cementing their role within the empire. As the 14th century rolled on, mercenaries from all over, Western Knights, Russians, and even Ottoman bands, were incorporated into Bulgarian forces. It was a reflection of the changing times and the pressures of holding their ground against increasingly diverse enemies. So you can see, the Bulgarian army wasn't just a fighting force. It was a dynamic institution that adapted to the times, leveraging terrain, tactics, and alliances to punch well above its weight.